Wednesday, July 19th, 2023 electronic meeting of the Ann Arbor Transportation Commission. This meeting is being held electronically, but we intend to conduct this meeting similarly to an in-person meeting. Public comment will be via telephone or Zoom only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call 206-337-9723 and enter meeting ID 934-6385-2907 or join via the Zoom link. This information is also available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city website and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 16. So now, Chris, if you could please call roll.
Not a problem. I will now call roll. I've received regrets from Commissioner Keeler, Hutchinson, and Margolis, who will not be able to attend. Please say here and where you're dialing in when your name is called. Commissioner Boland.
I'm here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Ackman.
Here, Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Broven.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Automaki.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Hook.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Keeler is absent. Commissioner Clayman.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Lee.
Here from Detroit.
Commissioner Anderson.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Hess.
Here from Ann Arbor.
And Lieutenant Mike Sherba.
Here from Tyrone Township.
Thank you. With that, we have quorum.
All right, there are two items on the consent agenda, approval of the agenda and approval of the minutes. Are there any modifications to the consent agenda? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented? Motion by Dharma, seconded by Julie. All those in favor of the motion, please say yes or raise your hand. And those opposed to the motion, please say no or raise your hand. All right, consent agenda is approved. Okay, now on to public comment. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. Again, please call 206-337-9723 and enter meeting ID number 934-6385-2907 or connect via Zoom as described on the agenda. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number or the person's Zoom ID. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone or select the raise hand button in Zoom. You'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area, mute any television or background sounds so that we can hear you clearly. Let's see. Chris, does it look like we have anyone?
I don't see any raised hands at this moment.
We don't, and while we give folks a chance to raise their hand or think about doing that, so I did want to mention one quick thing, and that is that there were 3 emails included in the packet as part of public comment. One of them was from Commissioner Pete Hauk, so I want to thank him for that comment and all the other commenters. And one thing that I just wanted to state for the Commission's benefit as well as the public's is any email that is sent to the Transportation Commission email address, which is transportationcommission@a2gov.org. That goes to an Outlook inbox that's monitored by staff. It doesn't automatically get distributed to commissioners. And so what we do is we take that email, we redact out any contact information. So, bots can't find your contact information. And then we upload it in the public comment section. So that way it's out for everybody to see equally. So I just wanted to make sure that people understood that kind of that's what we do with those communications that are sent to the Transportation Commission inbox. And I droned on just long enough that someone did raise their hand. So caller ending in the last 3 digits, 741. I have gone ahead and hit the allow to talk button. Go ahead and unmute yourself, and then the floor is yours. Caller with the last 3 digits, 741. Again, I think you hit *6 to unmute yourself. And there you go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Larry Deck. I'm speaking regarding the discussion tonight of the capital improvements plan and just alerting you to the issues that need to be addressed on that. As you may know, there have been plans for about 40 years to finish the Border Trail. It wasn't called the Border Trail then, but to finish it in the river valley near the Fuller Maiden Lane intersection. And it's important to get those projects moving. We have a timing window that needs to be addressed here, that there's some outside funding. Outside funders are in the process of developing their fundraising plans for the Border Trail. And it's important for the city to get in line with that and reaffirm its interest in completing those trail projects in that Fuller Maiden Lane area. I'd be happy to participate later in the discussion of if you'd like on the capital improvements plan, but just wanted to remind the commission of the issues here, and we hope to see some action by the city to reaffirm its longstanding commitments to completing the trails in that area. I guess that's all I have right now, but it's an important set of projects there that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. And we do have another Zoom attendee with their hand raised. Amar, I have gone ahead and allowed you to talk. Feel free to unmute yourself, and then the floor is yours.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Amar, like someone without the S, born and raised in Ann Arbor, and attended University of Michigan as well. Just got back to town the last couple of months from like living in other cities, and I guess I've been, noticing a lot of different changes and have been a little confused, seeing a lot more cameras everywhere, and obviously, that's been a big change. And then I saw like on July 12th, there was just like 2 sentences published of like a $4.75 million project in tangent with like the federal government on like cameras. And I was just like, would like a little bit more clarity on that in general. And I don't know if this is the right place for this. It seemed like logically the right place to understand like what's the rationale behind this, because I think safety is not necessarily the most reasonable rationale for this, especially when we like need that kind of money for like low income housing. We need it for construction. So I was really interested to see like from this perspective of this group, why is this like happening? I'm not really a huge fan of the idea of like more cameras. I don't know how many citizens are like, yeah, we need more cameras around. They seem to be pretty distracting, and all the flashing lights as well of like speed sensors that have been coming up in my neighborhoods have not been helpful for me because I have light sensitivity as well. And I've just been like a little confused. What's the point of all of that? Especially in intersections where I've never seen an accident in my entire life or anything like that. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Amar. I don't see any other callers with their hand raised at the moment.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for members, public, for coming and speaking this evening. All right. Onto the business section. First up, the Fulmer Miller to Foss traffic calming project. The petition process for Fulmer traffic calming between Miller and Foss is now complete and is before us for a recommendation. So Raymond, if you could review the project and answer any questions.
Sure thing. Probably the best thing for me to do is share my screen and show you the proposed plan or the layout of what's proposed. So, as you all know, this is a petition that was received through the traffic calming process. It was received in 2020. So while that is 3 years ago, we are slowly getting caught up, which is good. I think this is the 3rd month or 4th month in a row where we've had a traffic calming petition come before you. So, yes, Fulmer between Miller to the south and Foss to the north. And there are 6 devices that are proposed. Device 1 towards the north end is a curb extension. It's roughly, it looks like maybe 200 feet or so south of Foss. Then about 200 feet from that is a raised crosswalk. Moving another just under 200 feet to the south is another raised crosswalk. Then it looks like there's a little bit of a stretch, about 590 feet or so, where you hit the next speed hump, which is device 4. Then just past Garden Homes Drive, at a distance of about 328 feet, there is device number 5, a speed hump. And then just south of Fulmer Court is another speed hump, which makes for the 6th device. So again, there are 2 raised crosswalks, 3 speed humps, and 1 curb extension as part of this project. The estimated cost for the project is $100,000, and we feel there's sufficient budget in this year's traffic calming budget to support installation of this. Now, whether that gets done later this construction season, in other words, this calendar year, or early next year when the construction season opens back up is to be determined. But we are programming this work with the preventive maintenance and resurfacing. If you may or may not know, I think we've mentioned this casually in the past, that we piggyback traffic calming on top of the resurfacing program, because the same equipment is generally used to put in things like speed humps as what is used for, resurfacing and things like that. So, and then we don't have to put out a separate contract, so we can kind of piggyback off of that. So, yeah, and then the petition, as was stated in the backup in the draft resolution, received 73% support from the neighborhood. So and that's from respondents who responded to the poll. The minimum threshold is 50% or higher, so that threshold was met. So since there is support from the neighborhood, we're bringing it to the Transportation Commission for recommendation before we take it to City Council.
Thank you, Raymond. Dharma?
Am I missing something? I don't see a resolution here, so I wasn't clear if it was an item of action tonight.
Oh, there should have been.
At least it's not on the agenda. Maybe it was in the. I just see the plan. I don't know. Did other people see a resolution?
There's not usually a resolution in the agenda, I don't think.
Oh, okay.
Just different from how.
Okay. That's.
My apologies. That might be an oversight on our part. We oftentimes will include the resolution. It depends if the resolution's ready or not, but the resolution is pretty much sums up what we just discussed. It talks about the process, talks about the devices and the costs.
Cool.
My apologies that was omitted.
I do have a couple of questions just related to the actual conditions. So I wasn't familiar with the street, but I just pulled it up and it looks like it's probably a route where people are trying to bypass Maple to get through. Is that, what was the kind of, what's going on in that area?
It's hard for me to know exactly all the travel patterns, especially through residential streets. There doesn't seem to be a direct cut through, because Fulmer kind of dead ends into Foss, which then is a cul-de-sac on, what would that be, the east side. So in other words, if you're going to use it as a sort of cut through, you'd have to kind of snake your way through the neighborhood, which sometimes dissuades people from doing that. But it is a longer stretch, like a straightaway, especially right after you get past Fulmer Court and before you get to Foss. And oftentimes that vehicles tend to pick up speeds when you have a straight, long, narrow stretch of road. So I can't really speculate exactly what might be happening there. But the neighborhood petitioned for it and supported it. So that's why we are where we are.
Cool, thanks.
I could add there is a city park, Garden Homes Park, with a couple of sidewalk entrances right on Fulmer. And although Fulmer dead ends, it looks like people would maybe want to be taking a left onto Foss, and that goes over to Maple. So maybe people are trying to avoid the Miller Maple intersection.
Yeah.
I'm just guessing, but there's a city park there with a playground and all that. Yeah, more questions. Go for it, Dharma.
No more questions, just to follow up. I just think it's interesting to see what kinds of roads are these issues happening on. So when I look at this, and then especially when I look at the road parallel to it, Franklin, it looks like it potentially could be the same kinds of conditions. Yeah, just interesting.
Peter.
I
I was going to say the same thing that Dharma just said. Like, are we going to solve the problem on Fulmer and then create a problem on Franklin, which is one street over, and looks like it would also be a cut through to achieve the same thing? I mean, if we really are trying to avoid that Maple Miller intersection.
Yeah, again, it's hard for me to speculate, but it could very well happen, right? As a matter of fact, we just did Longman Fairview, just got installed, I think, this week, which was a traffic calming petition from a year plus ago or so. But now we are processing one for Grandview, which is, I think, the next block or 2 blocks away. So it's not uncommon, and this is a conversation that this commission has even had about a more network style approach. We've tried that on. We've suggested it to some neighborhoods, I guess I should say, with mixed success. So, typically what we say is, if anybody on any of the adjacent streets is interested in traffic calming, we point them to, the process. And if they're interested in pursuing it, we'll take their petition in and happily engage them in the process.
Is Franklin part of the streets resurfacing this year?
I don't know off the top of my head. I can try to get you an answer.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is that we would then miss the opportunity for that efficiency of doing Franklin. If we come back and try and do Franklin next year, we wouldn't be resurfacing it again yet. So I guess that's my concern about doing one and not the other.
Give Raymond a second here to look up the answer to that.
No, it does not look like. It looks like there's a tiny little court off of Franklin as well as Fulmer that is projected to get some street maintenance. Let's see, share my screen. So here's Fulmer, here's Franklin. So it's just these little cul-de-sacs that look like they're getting some treatment.
So Fulmer isn't getting resurfaced then, it looks like, either?
Correct.
Okay.
Based on my interpretation of the dashboard here.
I'm sorry, Raymond, I guess I misunderstood. I thought you said recently that it was that this project was going to be combined with our streets resurfacing project. So,
oh no, I'm sorry. Maybe I wasn't clear about that. All traffic calming installations are piggybacked off of the resurfacing program.
I see.
So that's not to say that they're resurfacing on the street. It just means that the Cadillac, for example, is the name of the paving company. They will install this device, and any of the traffic calming devices, whatever contractor is on under contract for resurfacing installs. Or sorry, I probably didn't explain that well the first time. Hopefully I made it clear, but I feel like I'm stumbling over my words even worse now. So
I get it now. Thanks.
Okay. Do you happen to know, Raymond, if residents on Franklin Street were part of the survey? I suspect not, but I can't remember if there's a radius where they would have
no,
been.
it's only the residents that are on the segment of the roadway, and then typically any of the end caps. I think it's within 100 feet. So for example, maybe the property at the very edge of Foss may have been included, but we don't petition the adjacent streets. It's just kind of the bookends that would be able to pull into the program.
All right. And okay. Other questions, comments? All right, well, let's see, is there a motion to recommend approval of the Fulmer traffic calming project between Miller and Foss? All right, motion by Megan, seconded by Dharma. So all those in favor of the motion, say yes or raise your hand. All right, all those opposed to the motion, please say no or raise your hand. Okay, it would appear that the motion passes. So I think we'll see this in front of City Council soon. All right, that's it for business tonight. Next up, the information and discussion section. First, we have the U of M TRI update. We're joined tonight by Jim Sayer, who's going to talk about some of the current projects and research conducted at the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute. So Jim, thank you very much for coming tonight. Been looking forward to seeing you, and the floor is yours. I believe you're able to share your screen, and if people have questions, by the way, as we go through, please raise your hand on Zoom so I can see them. And yeah, welcome, James.
Great, thanks. Or is that showing in presenter mode or?
Looks good. You're in presenter mode.
Yeah.
So
Okay. All right. So thanks for having me this evening. As mentioned, I wanted to talk about a couple of projects that are closely related to one another. One is fairly recent and actually hasn't even kicked off yet, technically. It's a federally funded project. Both the projects I'll talk about are federally funded. Both projects really focus on wireless communication between road users and the infrastructure. So the idea that vehicles, pedestrians, bicyclists, and traffic signals or mid-block crosswalks could all be wirelessly communicating with one another in order to avoid crashes, warn drivers that there may be a pedestrian in the crosswalk, or there may be a bicyclist in the bike lane. This is a continuation, actually, of a long series of projects that we've been undertaking in Ann Arbor, beginning back when we wrote a proposal for what was called Connected Vehicle Safety Pilot Model Deployment, or just called Safety Pilot. That was awarded in 2011, but actually launched in 2012. In that project, we instrumented 27 intersections, I believe, and 3,000 vehicles to wirelessly communicate with one another. The emphasis back then, again, this is federally funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, was focus on vehicle-to-vehicle crashes. And so that's what we did. After about a year and a half, close to 2 years of having that project in place, where traffic signals were broadcasting their signal phase and timing. We had warnings on curves on a couple of locations in Ann Arbor to provide curve speed warnings. We transitioned into another phase called the Ann Arbor Connected Vehicle Test Environment. Again, that was still federally funded. We dropped down to about 2,200 vehicles and actually increased the number of intersections that were broadcasting signal phase and timing across town. We went up to about 70 locations from the original 27 and kept basically a large cadre of vehicles operating that were broadcasting with one another. In 2019, that morphed into what's called the Ann Arbor Connected Environment. And that was privately funded. In the Ann Arbor Connected Environment, we equipped our first crosswalks, mid-block crosswalks, using sensing technology to detect the presence of a pedestrian in a crosswalk. The idea there was to warn vehicles that were approaching that a pedestrian was present. We also continue to collect data on vehicle-to-vehicle communication, were crashes prevented, and also the messages were being broadcast and heard by the infrastructure. More recently, in 2021, we started a project called Smart Intersection Project, and I'll explain a little bit more about what that specific project was about in the next slide. It has not wrapped up yet, but recently, a couple of months ago, we were awarded another project, and that's called the Ann Arbor Connected Environment 2.0. And again, I'll talk in more detail about those in particular, but again, they both focus on wireless communication and advanced sensing of the environment in order to help prevent crashes, as well as their other features. So the Smart Intersection Project, what is unique about it is that, excuse me, we're using sensors like a LiDAR and radar and thermal imaging to detect the presence of pedestrians in crosswalks, bikes and bike lanes, emergency vehicles, and just in general traffic volume. And we're able to assign each of those images that are processed there at the intersection wireless information that could be used by vehicles that are listening for those signals to help warn them about the presence of these vehicles. The advantage of using the sensor information is there's always been a chicken and egg kind of battle going on. Do you equip the infrastructure with technology first, or do you equip the vehicles with the technology first? And everybody's, both sides have been waiting for the other to actually make a major move. This allows us to concentrate on equipping the environment and still getting the benefit of a large number of vehicles being equipped by broadcasting wireless signals, we call pseudo BSMs, basic safety messages, based upon the image processing that's going on, or the LiDAR processing that's going on. And we'll be equipping all of the transit vehicles in the community under the Smart Intersection Project. So that includes AAATA buses, University of Michigan buses, and school buses for the Ann Arbor Public School System. There are a large number of partners involved in the Smart Intersections project. You notice a couple automotive manufacturers, Qualcomm, a telecommunications, a communications organization, and then a number of subrecipients. Difference between collaborators is they're actually contributing money. Subrecipients are actually receiving funds, federal funds, for playing their role in the project. They may also be contributing some cost share. The next project, again, the one that was just awarded a couple months ago, is called the Ann Arbor Connected Environment 2.0. And this is a 3-year, $12.7 million project with almost $9.9 million in federal funds and $2.8 million in cost share. The high-level objectives are to replace the old wireless technology that we previously had installed in the environment in Ann Arbor, the public roads, with a technology called cellular V2X. The FCC made a decision about a year ago that they were no longer going to provide sufficient spectrum for the old communication technology called DSRC. And so we're trying to upgrade everything in the environment to the newest standards. We'll also be equipping about 100 vehicles My hope is that those will largely be emergency vehicles so that we can take advantage of deploying a particular application called emergency vehicle signal preemption that will allow emergency vehicles as they approach a light, they would broadcast a signal that would turn the light red in all directions and then allow the emergency vehicle to traverse the intersection safely. This again is leveraging some of the work that we're doing in the Smart Intersection project, which has 21 intersections. So we're taking those 21 and then we're building up on the rest. I think it's around 57, trying to get back up to our 70 or 72 installations throughout the community. We're also hoping that in some of the installations in the Ann Arbor connected environment, we can also add some additional sensor information, like is being done in the Smart Intersection project. Again, here, the idea being trying to collect this information, process it at the intersection, and be able to broadcast messages that represent all of the vehicles that are actively moving in the vicinity. This is just a map, shows you approximately where the locations of the intersections and the mid-block crosswalks. The dark circled traffic signals, those represent the 21 locations, and then also along Plymouth Road, 21 locations that are being addressed by the Smart Intersections project. And then the white circle traffic signals are the locations where we'll be putting the new radios associated with the most recent project, AACE 2.0. Not necessarily all of these intersections as shown would be the ones that are instrumented. This is just for illustration purposes. If we're able to deploy emergency vehicle signal preemption, you would, for example, see a lot more installation on 5th. We had previously, a few years ago, surveyed the Ann Arbor Police, the University Police, and the fire department to find out what were troublesome intersections for them to get through on a regular basis. And at least from the fire department, intersections on 5th downtown were problematic. So we'll be revisiting some of these intersections, but by and large, our goal is to cover a significant amount of the community roadways. So what's different this time from what we've done in the past? In the past, we were doing a lot of this on our own. Now we have more support from actual original equipment manufacturers, vehicle manufacturers, and parts suppliers, tier ones. We're also working with an international group called the 5G Automotive Alliance. They're developing what are called day one applications that can be deployed in these kinds of connected environments. And we're also taking advantage of some other work that's being done by the Institute for Transportation Engineers and their guidelines for how to build out these intersections. I mentioned that emergency vehicle signal preemption is one of the applications we'd like to deploy. We also would like to deploy red light violation warning. And that would be a system that detected a vehicle about to run a red light and then broadcast a wireless signal to other vehicles or other road users not to enter the intersection, for example. Everything that we're doing in terms of our data collection is going to be based in the cloud. Now, any of the imaging from radar or LiDAR or thermal cameras, it again gets processed at the intersection. And so we're not retaining any sensitive PII data. We'll also be deploying something a bit more sophisticated and being able to detect if there is a rogue vehicle or a rogue person out there sending messages. So misbehavior detection and revoke authorization to broadcast. As I mentioned already, we're going to try to equip as many of the traffic locations with the additional sensor information in the AACE 2.0. And we'll be doing outreach to the community. We've got an educational component as well as workforce development. In terms of workforce development, we've worked pretty closely with Washtenaw Community College, starting way back in 2012. These are some of the partners. WSP is a trusted partner of the city's Institute of Transportation Engineers. Integral Blue is a company that provides sensing information. Ford and Qualcomm, and we've had another major automotive manufacturer contact us recently, saying that they want to be part of the project as well. So that's all I have. There's my email address. And feel free to send me a message if you have any questions you don't get an opportunity to ask here. Be happy to address them.
All right, there we go. All right, let's go with Julie first, please.
Hi, thanks for that presentation. I was pleased to hear that you've got an educational component. I often feel like that's where our initiatives fall short. Can you say a little bit more about what you're trying to educate people about?
Yeah,
How?
yeah, so it hasn't been formally fleshed out, but I can tell you kind of some of the things we've done in the past. In the past, we've invited middle schoolers and talked to them not just about advanced technology, but also about traffic safety. The other thing, we give hands-on opportunities to students, both the University of Michigan and Washtenaw Community College, to come in and work on the project and learn firsthand about the technology and how it's deployed, how it's installed in the infrastructure and in the vehicles.
Sorry. So what about education for drivers? Are there things that they're going to notice, or you think there's nothing that they're going to notice and wonder about?
Well, right now there are already the radios at the intersections, and there have been there since 2012. We're not getting any questions of late. And so we'll just be replacing those with the new technology. The only drivers that will actually be experiencing any warnings will be there are 200 equipped vehicles in the Smart Intersections project and 100 equipped vehicles in the AACE 2.0. So, and those are going to really be for the most part, dedicated fleets, like the transit vehicles and emergency vehicles.
And like the signal prioritization thing, that will just be sort of transparent. People won't really notice what's happening.
Yeah, the general public should not really notice the light. The light may turn red, out of cycle, but they will quickly understand why it turned red because they will hear the sirens, in advance, and they'll see the emergency vehicle traverse the intersection.
Great, thank you.
Molly?
Thanks. This is great. This might be a question more for Ken, but it sounds like the equipment is going on transit vehicles, but I didn't see signal priority for transit vehicles listed as one of the things. And I also didn't see Triple ATA listed as like a partner. And so I guess I'm curious about where signal priority for transit fits into this system and process.
So I can actually at least begin to answer that. Ken may have further information. So AAATA actually has a preferred way to execute transit signal prioritization, and that's in the process of deploying that. And it is a back office solution. So there's communication of the transit vehicle back to AAATA, and then they send out commands, as I understand it, to the traffic signal. This is really just inherent at the intersection. And so AAATA wants to go the route that they are using, because as I understand it, they feel it helps them better track their vehicles. I can't remember all of the specific arguments, but they prefer that back office approach, where we'll still be equipping their vehicles, but they won't actually be using our application. The school buses and the university's blue buses will be using our application.
And will those buses be getting signal priority? Or
Yes,
no? They will.
yes, that's the plan.
School buses too, you said.
Correct.
That's very exciting to me. Thank you.
Peter?
Thanks for the presentation. I noticed in your overview there was some mention of communication or some support for vulnerable users. Is that not part of this trial? There wasn't any mention of implementation of that in this trial.
No, it is.
Okay.
So we will be equipping a number of mid-block crosswalks. Also, the Smart Intersection project, when it's sensing what's going on in an intersection, it includes the pedestrian crosswalks at that intersection and the bike lanes. So it is able to present a warning to an equipped vehicle that there is a pedestrian in the crosswalk. Somebody's about to make a left-hand turn, and a pedestrian's in the crosswalk.
Okay.
And
so what are the inputs? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm having trouble hearing you.
Okay. We're trying some other more advanced technology, working with Qualcomm and Verizon. It's not ready for prime time yet. The biggest challenge we have is the positioning. The quality of essentially GPS signal is not good enough to position a person on a sidewalk as opposed to just on the curb, inside on the roadway.
So the sensing technology is part of the infrastructure, or it's relying on, okay. All right.
Yeah, the sensors will be mounted in locations at the intersection to be able to monitor the crosswalks and the bike lanes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Dharma?
Thanks. To piggyback off of Molly's question, has there been any coordination or thought about, I imagine this becomes super useful when there's a dedicated lane for transit, when you dedicate a lane to transit, because otherwise I would imagine that the signal prioritization also helps whatever cars are behind the bus. And I'm just thinking of this as like a multiplier to be able to do something like bus rapid transit at some point. So how is that?
So this would help in terms of a bus rapid transit. But there's a lot more to bus rapid transit than just the signal prioritization. In theory, it should not be helping people that are following the buses very much. It should really just extend the phase. If it's in the green phase and about to turn yellow, it should just extend the green phase a few more seconds, long enough to get the bus through. The sensing technology is really quite good in terms of determining what is the distance of the bus to the stop bar, and then knowing how much additional time to add.
Okay. And then I'm wondering, to what degree does this go? And I don't know if this is a question for Raymond, like how does this combine with the Safe Streets for All grant and the near miss detection? Is this part of the part of the same effort, or is it completely separate?
I think to be determined. I think there are some technologies that Jim and Umtree are deploying that we are looking at closely as part of the Safe Streets for All. So some of the near miss analytics, I think some of the elements that we hope to deploy might be similar to, compatible, or the same as what Umtree is using for some of their connected vehicle and test environment and smart intersection projects. And we're just in the infancy of kind of mapping out those next steps because council members, we just accepted the award at the last meeting. So we're still in negotiations with Federal Highway on all of our steps forward. And quite frankly, we're gonna have to go through procurement on all of these because since these are federal funds, we'll have to put out RFPs, let companies bid on what it is we're hoping to do. But I think some of them, we'll leverage what we're tied in pretty close with the work that Jim is doing because they're using a lot of the city infrastructure for this stuff. So we're aware of those initiatives, and then we're tied into those, and then we can leverage that initiative for what it is we're doing as well.
Okay. And to piggyback off what one of the callers asked about with regard to cameras being, visibly installed, is that part of the Umtree effort? Or
so there are sensors. It's not necessarily a camera. It could be LiDAR, light imaging and distance, or it could be radar that's used. We're actually evaluating different sensing technologies to try to determine which is the most efficient under various weather conditions, for example, and lighting conditions.
Okay, and I know DDA is deploying things like that too, to be able to detect number of bikes, number of pedestrians, number of cars in certain corridors.
And if just add one other thought to that, I do want to disclose we do have cameras that we use for traffic signal actuation. You've probably heard me say grid smart cameras. Grid smart are kind of a fisheye lens that kind of capture the whole intersection. The reason why we like using grid smart is it's much more sensitive to cyclists. If you think about the magnetic loops or the magnetic pucks that are in the road, if you're not aligned on those very well, they will not detect. So a vehicle that's taking up the whole lane will automatically trigger that sensor. But if a cyclist is off, near the curb, it may not be within the range of that, magnetic field. And then also bikes have a much smaller, metallic magnetic field about them. So even when they're right on top of the sensor, they're not always triggered. So the grid smart cameras do not record. They are solely using, they're polygons. It's a sensor, kind of like Jim is saying. So there is no stored footage that the city currently stores at all. And then we also do have some kind of like closed circuit cameras or pan-tel zoom cameras. That is, those are used solely for monitoring traffic flow, especially like on game day. So you'll see them like on Main Street, Ann Arbor, Saline, some of those areas, some of the major ingress and egress into town. Because that helps the police department and others determine when to switch Ann Arbor Saline to the one-way condition, switch it away from the one-way condition, for example. Those also do not record. So any of the traffic video cameras or transportation-related video cameras are not recording that are part of our network. Now, that's not to say in the future that might change for whatever reason, but that, I did just want to kind of clarify that, that there are cameras out there and they are part of the vehicle detection system and the signal system.
Got it. Thank you. And I guess I'll just, state that it's not legal in Michigan to issue speeding tickets based on cameras, right? We can't do that. So just guess I would make that point. Yeah. Sorry, just to go back to the Umtree, are you expecting to have results that you'll be able to share out, or how are you guys monitoring the success of this? And how can we learn about it?
Yeah, quite honestly, some of this, we will be the first location in the US to deploy using certain new guidelines. So some of the success is actually being able to get the things deployed. But yeah, we will be looking at the data after the fact. So later in the program to see, how efficient was it to be able to get an emergency vehicle through a stretch of Fifth, for example. Hopefully we'll be able to do some before and after data collection for comparisons purpose.
Thank you.
Question. So a couple of the applications you mentioned are pedestrian detection at crosswalks and red light warning and the emergency vehicles approaching intersections. So drivers that are equipped with this technology in the study, the 100 or 200 vehicles, they'll be trained, I assume, or they have like some additional hardware in the vehicle or like flashing lights, or how does that implement?
So there essentially is a radio that's installed in the vehicle. And then for those that are getting warnings, in this case, it'll be 300 vehicles total. There will be a driver vehicle interface. So there'll be a small display that communicates. That's particularly important, for example, in the emergency vehicle situation. As an emergency vehicle approaches an intersection, the light may already be red from the direction that they're traveling, but they want some kind of feedback that the light's been turned red on the cross street, for example. So that kind of information will be displayed, and depending on the application, the amount, what needs to get displayed depends on the application.
And you envision adding applications throughout the period of this study?
Once that international organization 5GAA has settled on what they call day one applications, we'll be looking at more of those. So we're going to try to implement all the applications that we will implement in the beginning rather than add some. But we don't quite know what those are going to be. I say emergency vehicle signal preemption and red light violation just because those are ones, having taken part in a lot of the meetings, those are ones that frequently are referenced and are almost certainly going to be day one applications. But we hope to deploy more.
Other questions or comments? All right, well, there was a lot of great information, Jim. Thank you so much for coming, and a lot of really good questions. I learned a lot. And I hope to see you back here again at some point, regular update to see how the implementation is going. And then, if there's any interim results that you can share, I think it'd be something good to periodically check in on.
We'll be implementing this technology in MCity, the connected and automated vehicle test facility here on campus. And so I'll talk to Raymond. I'm going out on a limb here. But if the Transportation Commission wanted to come out and experience that, we could arrange it.
That's a great idea. Oh, or when all of the intersections have been established exactly where you're installing this technology, it'd be nice to have a list and to know exactly where they are as well around the city.
That will not be a problem.
Yeah, just one little minor note. We're happy to set that up if that is of interest to the commission. If we do have a quorum that would be present, we would just have to publicly notice it. So but that's a minor thing. We can definitely account for that. So.
All right. Well, thanks again. Appreciate it, Jim.
All right. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Oh, thanks, you too. All right, moving on to the next topic, 7th and Greenview projects update. The commission may recall we reviewed the 7th Street project last year and made recommendations. Ultimately, council directed staff to develop new designs. We're joined tonight by Tracy Anderson, who will give an overview of the South 7th Street project, as well as the sibling project of Greenview on the other side of Scioto Church. So Tracy, welcome. And the floor is yours.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm gonna see if I remember how to share my screen. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay. So yes, this presentation is about the road improvements for Greenview Drive from Stadium to Delaware and South 7th from Scioto Church to Delaware. The agenda for this short presentation is I'm just going to go over the project overview as a whole, the public engagement process that we went through to come up with these proposed designs. I'm going to run through the proposed designs that we have so far and then save room for any questions. So the project boundaries is, as shown here in red, it's South 7th Street from Scioto Church to Delaware. And then Greenview Drive Stadium all the way down to 7th. Originally, it was broken up into two projects. So it was South 7th and Greenview, south of Scioto Church, and then what we're calling North Greenview, just to ease confusion. But because they're being constructed at the same time, we made it one big project. For the whole project, we're replacing aging water mains under all the roads. And North Greenview and South 7th are also getting stormwater management system. They're actually in two different watersheds, but they're getting the same sort of detention system to help ease flooding downstream. We're repaving the street at the end, and this is a good time since we're ripping up the street to put all this stuff underneath the street. It's a great time to reconfigure the road and provide transportation safety improvements, which is why we're all here today to talk about all ages and abilities bike route that North Greenview and South 7th fall in. As you know, and was stated, that South 7th was, along with the CIP plan, the capital improvement plan, and the transportation plan, we also have this resolution from council to narrow the road, to go back for additional public engagement and narrow the road somehow with these speed management tools to make it an appropriate all ages and abilities bike network. So for the public engagement process, we did it in two separate processes. It was the same process, but two different rounds. One was with North Greenview and one was with South Greenview and 7th. So we met with the residents to ask what their experience with the road was. These are a list of what we heard from the residents. You don't have to read them all, but as you can see, the top of both lists is speeding. So we kept these in mind when we made our design. We tried to solve as many as we could. After that, at the first meeting, we explained some of the options that we have that we usually use for all ages and abilities bike routes to manage speed, like chicanes, roundabouts, bump outs, stuff like that. We also explained some design limitations for the road, like we can't do any vertical elements like speed humps or raised intersections, and we can't remove or add stop signs to slow traffic. And then the public divided into groups and they designed the road. They all had an blank aerial photo of the road, and we gave them these options that they could use in a dummy budget. These aren't real costs in any mean. And we said you have $20 to spend, and so put as many of these things on there as you want, and what kind of things do you want to see? What would you put on the road? We got a lot of good feedback from this because it put the real aspect of budget in people's minds. You can't just shoot for the moon and get it because there's other constraints in mind. And it kind of put them in our shoes of how they're going to design the road. So after that, we collected all of those. We considered the options that they came up with and our engineering judgment. And we made 3 or 4 designs. We made 3 for North Greenview and 4 for South 7th. And we had another in-person public meeting where we shared all the options with them. We went through all the aspects of each of them and had them break out individually this time and fill out a form for each option of what do you like about this option? What do you not like about this option? What's your favorite option? Do you have any questions about anything? And then we took all of those forms and all the emailed forms afterwards, if in case people couldn't come to the meeting. And we considered all of this input. We considered all the plans that the city already had in the works, and our engineering judgment again, and to develop the final proposed designs. So I will go over those right now. So here's the final design for 7th Street. I know it's a little hard to see, so I'll zoom in for you in chunks. So 7th Street right now is 43 feet wide, and a normal residential road in this area is about 30 feet wide. So we narrowed it to 30 feet, all the whole length of the road. We did this by bringing in the east side of the road 13 feet. So that made enough room to put an extra wide sidewalk in there. This is an 8-foot wide sidewalk. It's not a shared use path, but it's just an extra wide, extra comfortable sidewalk. It actually matches the Delaware, I believe, has some extra wide sidewalks also. So it matches the rest of the neighborhood that people seem to like. In this block down by Delaware, we made the other side with the school on it has an extra wide sidewalk also. To do this, however, we had to take out some trees here. So we replanted them right in front in this green space here. And some of these are so small, we might be able to just move them over to accommodate the sidewalk. Another thing in this section is we removed this bump out at Greenview. We did this for a couple of reasons. One is that since the entire road is now narrower, we didn't think we needed it anymore. And also a lot of people didn't like the bump out anyway. So we took that into consideration also. Here's the second half of the road. We added some crosswalks here at Landsway and Brayside. And we kind of reconfigured the painting of this intersection because they said this gets really busy really fast, and especially at drop off and pickup time. So we kept the left turn and straight right lane. We added some pavement markings just for sharing the lane with bikes. And coming into the neighborhood, we have extra Cheryl markings just to call extra attention to when you come into the neighborhood, like this is bike friendly. There are other people on the road. Beware of this. So we added this yellow line here. So there's no parking on this block, just to help cars go in and out of the neighborhood. We didn't touch this island at all. This was kind of a no-no to move. It was put in with MDOT dollars. And, that was not part of the project, so we didn't touch that. For Greenview Drive, this is the final design for Greenview. They decided to narrow both sides of the road to treat everybody equally. Everybody gets the same amount of extra yard and driveway. Again, it's hard to see, so I'll zoom in. This North Greenview is currently 36 feet wide, and we narrowed it again to 30 feet on the normal, not the bumped out sections. So this is still room for parking and 2 drive lanes, 2 park lanes. I'm very comfortable with, again, matching the rest of the roads in the area. And then this group of residents was actually very pro bump out at our first meeting. So we added bump outs at all these intersections, which will help with parking too, so people don't park too close to the intersections. We made, in between the bump outs, we made 24 feet just to have enough room for 2 drive lanes and be a little more comfortable for bikes. Instead of squeezing it down to 20 feet, we put it to 24. We added some crosswalks, some were, some crosswalks were limited, like can't put a crosswalk here because there's a driveway here. There's a utility pole on this one, so we put crosswalks where they made sense to add crossings on the road. Here's just a little more north on the road. More bump outs. We didn't remove any legal parking spaces in these areas because you can't park this close to a intersection or crosswalk anyway. And then Avondale, we totally reconfigured because this was a big issue with the configuration of Avondale. I can zoom in on that a little more too. So this one now, it 90s down to the road, so it's more of a 90-degree turn. This is just, we just added some green space and turned the sidewalks in. So then this is just the normal looking bump out as all the other intersections have. Continuing north, this is just the rest of the road. Not there's this bump out to come into the neighborhood to really narrow it down right away when you come in, just to give everybody warning that this is a slow road. Don't be cutting through here. We also, in both situations, we did not put a center line down the road. It was kind of funny because North Greenview has a center line and South 7th doesn't, and they both wanted the opposite, to slow traffic, to do the same thing. So since they're both residential streets, we did not put the center line back, but we do have these Sharrow bike symbols. But those are the only pavement markings we would have. So those are the designs, and now I can take any questions.
All right. People could raise their hands using Zoom. We can ask some questions. No questions? Okay, Dharma.
I was trying to let other people go, but if no one else is going to go, I'll go because this is my neighborhood. So, and Pete's. I went to the meetings for North Greenview, was not able to attend the ones for South 7th, but I guess just a couple observations. One, I really appreciated the way that staff started the public engagement process by really honing in on our comprehensive transportation plan and its two key goals that we were trying to accomplish. And, I know that there are plenty of parents on Greenview that feel that people are going too fast, that people go around that corner at Avondale too fast, and heard universal excitement about bringing the road in tighter. So I think that's a really good outcome. I will say, and I emailed this separately, I'm hoping that we can use the All Ages, All Abilities network that goes across neighborhood streets. And again, I appreciate making these function more like neighborhood streets than cut throughs like it seems like they were designed for. But I'm hoping that we can use better, more striking visual representation, that it's part of like a bike boulevard or whatever you want to call it. NACTO has treatments that are basically, it's paint in the road, but it's more than your typical Sharrow. Really just to give that visual signal that you're in kind of a different space, and also kind of signal that it's a route. So those are my thoughts.
All right, other comments? Oh, if people are thinking of questions, I have one. So will this, we're not voting on it here, but is this going straight to council for approval?
No, because we're not removing more than one block of parking. So we don't have to go to council. They will only see it when it goes out for construction award.
Okay. Other questions or comments from anyone on the designs that we've seen? I appreciate seeing a road narrowing. I don't think I've really seen a road narrowing other than bump outs around Ann Arbor. So this is exciting. I know it's typically a very challenging thing to do. So yeah, it's nice to see this form of a road diet. It's great, and because we all know these streets are just way too wide for their intended purpose. So I'd like to see the fresh thinking there. Peter.
So we do have some before data, speed data that we took. I guess I'd like to give some thought as to whether we need to collect more or from any other areas. Because I would really like to also have after data to show whether or not we've achieved what we set out to do, right? So we're expecting that narrowing the road and adding these bump outs are going to encourage people to behave better on these stretches of road and, go an appropriate speed inside the neighborhood. So I would really like to know if that happens. I'm hoping it will with these new narrow configurations, but let's check it out.
Yeah, we were planning on getting after data too, so it's on the books.
Excellent. Have any changes been made since that before data was taken? So for example, was a 25-mile-per-hour speed limit sign added before or after the data was taken?
I'm not sure about that. But the data we have is for South 7, and it happened before I came onto the project.
Okay.
Maybe Raymond knows, but I'm not sure.
I know for sure that a speed limit sign was added already.
All right, Dharma?
I just think I can respond to that because I'm pretty sure the sign went up after the data were collected. Raymond, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the sequence that I remember.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. Because the data was collected, I think, for the last iteration. And then with this later round of engagement, one of the comments that came out of that was, because 7th Street transitions when you hit SIO, right? I mean, north of SIO, it's more of a arterial, south, it's more of a neighborhood street. We don't typically sign neighborhood streets because the distinction is pretty clear, but 7th Street, there was a pretty strong argument for the fact that the road changes characteristics. And so we put those signs up relatively recent, in the last couple of months, if memory serves me correctly.
Okay, I don't know how effective a speed limit sign would be at slowing people down, but it is a change, and it would be nice to have data that doesn't also conflate that change with it, to see them independently.
I'll say that, there were no signage changes on Greenview, north or south, right? It's just that section of South 7th that got the new sign. Is that right, Peter?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. 7th south of SIO Church.
Okay. All right. Other comments, questions? All right. Yeah. So we're not voting on this or anything, but personally, this is my first time seeing the designs. I'm encouraged. It wasn't even in. I didn't even consider it a possibility to narrow the road. I thought there were going to be other treatments considered and other things with parking. So yeah, it's good to see. I'm happy with it, I think. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming to our meeting tonight, Tracy, and presenting to that and answering our questions. All right. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Good night. Next section, capital improvement plan. I see Kayla's on. Hello, Kayla. We're joined by, yes, a familiar face. Kayla Coleman is going to give us an update on this year's modification to the capital improvement plan. So yeah, thanks again for coming out tonight, Kayla. And the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Hadamaki. Thank you, Transportation Commission, for having me. It's great to see familiar faces for those that were commissioners that I have worked with in the past, and I'm excited to get to know and start working with those of you who have more recently joined the commission. I'm here this evening to provide a little bit of an overview about the capital improvements plan. And this material will be familiar for some of you, and it may be new for others. I have been in this role for a little over a year now. So I was here last summer to provide the CIP overview presentation, and my predecessor, Deb Goslin, had provided it to the Transportation Commission in years before. So some of you have seen this content. I will try not to belabor it, but I do want to make sure that we give a chance for those that are newer to the process to ensure that you're following along and are up to speed on how the process works. So with that, let me start my screen share and let me know. I'm hoping you can see the CIP presentation. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So yes, I'm the capital projects asset manager for the city of Ann Arbor, and I prepare the CIP, which is, it's an annual process, but it does vary from the even years and the odd years, what we do. So I'll explain that a little more. But in just orienting us in general as to what the CIP is, this is a schedule of public service expenditures over a 6-year period. And it is a planning tool for large physical improvements that focuses on basic needs for the community to function. This is required by the state of Michigan, and it is something that we complete annually. So as I mentioned, in the even years, so last year in 2022, for example, we were doing a full update to the capital improvements plan. So looking at that entire 6-year block, identifying new projects, scoping new projects, we score them, prioritize them, and program the entire package of projects included in those 6 years. In the modification years, so the odd years like this year, 2023, we go through a condensed version of that process. So we will look at project scopes and we can modify them. We typically do not add new projects during a modification year, but we can make some programming adjustments. We don't go through the whole rescoring again in a modification year, but if we have found that there's some reason why a project needs to be delayed or a different project needs to be aligned with another existing project, we can make those tweaks in the schedule. And we look at, sorry if I didn't say, we look at just the first 2 years during these modification years. So rather than that complete 6-year package, we focus in on the next 2 years coming up. So right now we are in fiscal year 2024. And so we will look at the next 2 fiscal years, so FY 25 and 26 during this fall's CIP process. So for those that are wondering more about what is a capital project, what does that mean? This is physical projects that are for city infrastructure and assets that are greater than $100,000 of total investment. So that's sort of the threshold when we're talking about what qualifies as a capital project to be included in this planning process. It would be infrastructure and assets that we tend to group into these 3 categories: municipal facilities, transportation, and utilities. Those are the buckets of projects that we organize within. This also can include studies that are greater than $50,000 if that study is expected to lead to physical projects. This does not include operations and maintenance. This does not include private development. So just to give you a better sense of the type of work, type of projects we're looking at, the operations and maintenance work is planned for and budgeted in other ways. It just isn't part of this state required capital improvement plan. And in thinking about where the CIP process fits in the complete project life cycle, I like to use this graphic to remind us that we are at the very early stage of a project when we're talking about CIP. We are at the early planning stages, thinking about projects yet to come, projects that may be years down the road. This is far before the project actually gets designed and far before construction. But it is those early stages of planning that lead us to eventually seeing the project get implemented. So this overview slide here provides the kind of whole process for the CIP here at the City of Ann Arbor. So we are here today at the Transportation Commission. I've used the megaphones to indicate whenever there's a public hearing or public comment, opportunities for public involvement in the CIP process. We heard from some members of the public tonight during public comment that spoke on the capital improvement plan. So this is an opportunity to bring public visibility to this process as well as particularly from input for transportation commissioners. We move from, in the overall CIP process, we then move into these 3 steps. So this is looking at the CIP process overall, not necessarily in a modification year, but the 3 major steps that staff work through are identifying project scopes, prioritizing projects based on their value, and then programming them based on the way that they ranked and the budget estimates and funding availability. So those 3 steps happen in full in the even years, and in the odd years, we'll do some modified version of each of those steps. From that, a capital improvement plan is prepared that's taken to Planning Commission. They are the decision maker and approving body for the CIP. And the CIP is provided then to city leadership and finance staff who prepare the city's budget. So what gets put in the CIP does not mean that dollars are allocated, but it is the direct pipeline to the budget process from CIP to budgeting. And once it's proposed to council, if council takes action and approves the budgeted projects, then dollars are actually allocated. So just again, to give you a sense of what all is involved in the CIP process, we have staff from across the organization, as well as community partners who participate in the meetings and discussions. We include the Downtown Development Authority, University of Michigan, Housing Commission, the RIDE, in addition to our city units within our organization. And looking briefly, we'll look at each of those 3 major categories of infrastructure projects that I mentioned. Municipal facilities, that's things like city-owned buildings, parks and recreation facilities, solid waste. Transportation is the asset group category that includes the most different types of projects. So we have our own airport here at the City of Ann Arbor. There are many active transportation projects. That's where you'll see sidewalk projects, some bike facility projects there as well. Bridges, there's not a lot of projects in that area, but there are a few. And new streets, another area that you don't see a lot of projects, but we've got 1 or 2. That typically for new streets, you're talking about like a first time paving of a gravel road is the type of infrastructure project that might get programmed there. Other transportation, sort of a catch-all, but tends to include, I think there are some signal work types of projects, some other transportation studies, parking facilities. So the DDA plays a major role in that asset group. Street construction, that's all of the street resurfacing. All of those projects would go into that group. And then transit, we work with the RIDE to coordinate what is programmed in that area. Utilities, sanitary sewer, stormwater, and water. These are the pipes that are underneath the road. So a lot of times there is a coordinating transportation project or resurfacing project along with the utility project. Not always, but pretty often. And then looking at that CIP process, I talked about those 3 steps that are completed in a full plan year. I've added a little bit of text to sort of narrow in on how this is reflected in a modification year. So for identifying project needs, when we're in a full plan year, we're looking broadly to identify new projects. However, in a modification year, it's more focused on refinements and revisions to the scopes of existing projects. For prioritization, this is a step that we just don't really complete in a modification year. It is a major staff effort to go through each of those metrics, and we save that for every other year. If a new project gets identified in the modification year, which does happen from time to time, that one would be scored, but that's sort of the exception. And for programming, we're not doing a comprehensive programming of all 6 years, but we are looking at those next 2 years coming up, and we'll make tweaks as needed if there's been a project delay or some reason why a project isn't moving ahead as planned on schedule, or in the event that a project needs to be accelerated and move forward, we may make tweaks and find that one project comes forward and something else may be moved out in exchange for that. So thinking about the Transportation Commission's role, as you prepare, so staff are, the general timeline is that the CIP process happens in the fall. So we come to the Transportation Commission in the summer so that there's an opportunity to allow commissioners a little bit of time ahead of the staff meetings to be thinking about what you see in transportation plans and policies and what you see in the existing capital improvements plan. Do you find alignment there? Do you see any concerns? Are there areas that you feel policy isn't being reflected? Those are the sort of things we'd like for commissioners to be keeping an eye out and bringing to our attention. Also, it's always helpful if there's particular projects that the commission supports or endorses. That can be helpful to hear for staff to know. As well as if there's any other considerations that you want staff to be aware of as we are going into that CIP process. And then I like to mention, these notes at the bottom here about advising City Council on transportation policy. I think it's important for commissioners to keep in mind that your role affects capital projects all the time as you are advising Council on transportation policy. That can lead to new capital projects, that can impact how projects are implemented. All of that does connect together. So what's new since last time I was here? There was one thing I did really want to make sure to highlight, and that is our CIP dashboard. So if you go to a2gov.org/A2CIP map, it'll take you directly to an interactive dashboard. And this allows for, I believe, a much more user-friendly way to access the CIP data than what we've had available in the past. Previously, there were hundreds of pages of static PDFs. The data was there, but it took a little bit of digging and it was kind of tedious to get to. This search feature allows for you to use any keyword and find all of the projects that have that word in them in their title, and you can narrow in on a specific one, look at the dollars, see which fiscal year dollars are allocated, zoom into the map to see where it's located, and get more project information. So here's an example, searching Greenview, which we were just talking about in the prior presentation. You search that word and you'll find all of the capital projects that have that street listed, and then you can choose which one you're interested in. There's a fiscal year tab that you would click over to. It's going to default to show you this asset group tab, but the fiscal year tab is the one that would show you where dollars are allocated. And this is as of the time that the CIP project was approved in January of this year. So if things have changed, shifted around, that's not going to be reflected in real time. But this is a more interactive reflection of that plan that was approved at that time. So that completes my presentation. My contact information is here. Please feel free to follow up with any questions or feedback, and I am happy to take questions. So back to you, Chair Hadamaki.
Thank you. What questions do people have about the process, or you can bring up some specific projects if you want? Anything at all? I really appreciate the dashboard. I was playing around with it earlier, looking at some of the projects in the area. I think this is much more useful than sifting through all the PDFs that I've done in past years. So highly strongly encourage people to use this and come up with questions, and can email them to us or directly to Kayla. We can include things on future agendas. I appreciate Kayla soliciting our commission's input on projects. It's important to remember that we do have that ability. So Molly.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kayla, for that presentation. I have a question that's a little bit processy, I guess. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that the traffic calming committee has been looking at using like a capital projects as the sort of line for whether or not a project would trigger certain kinds of traffic calming or other efforts, speed management. And I'm curious about, so this is a modification year, so this feels like good timing. Next year will be a full CIP year. And I'm just curious about how a policy change like that sort of gets worked into the CIP process. I feel like sometimes there are recommendations by the commission that sorry, excuse me one moment. Good night, my darling. But they it doesn't always translate when budgets are actually being made. And so I'm curious about how we get a policy like that into the process so that it's actually considered when we're thinking about budgets.
So a policy about other improvements being made in coordination with traffic calming projects. Is that what?
Sorry, I'll give you a little bit more background. Basically, the idea would be that rather than waiting for a neighborhood to initiate a traffic calming petition, when a certain level of reconstruction is happening, so basically like when a road resurfacing rises to the level of a capital project, it would automatically trigger consideration of certain calming features, and all of that is sort of TBD. But we've talked about things like bump outs, raised crosswalks, etc. And I know that like budget is a big part of the challenge when we're talking about sort of trying to integrate traffic calming into like a stormwater and resurfacing kind of project. Calming has historically been integrated into those kinds of projects. Raymond, am I capturing this? Well, it's been a long day.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Go ahead, Raymond. Anything?
Distraction over here, just off camera.
Yeah, no, I think Molly hit it. It is kind of a process procedural, right? Like which informs which. So I think, and it's something we've even struggled with at the committee level. So.
Yeah. Well, I'll share some initial thoughts and I'll then lean to Raymond to step in and add to or correct me if I'm wrong here. But it sounds like if that were a policy that were recommended by the Transportation Commission and then acted on by City Council, that resurfacing projects or any utility project that's going to impact the roadway, that traffic calming be considered in coordination with that, which I think is what you were describing. That if that were a policy, for one, as you said, it would need fund. Like the funding question feels like the big the variable here, because when we think about resurfacing projects, which are often funded by the road millage, if we think about the utility projects that use the dollars from our water fund and our stormwater utility, there's very specific parameters about how those dollars can be spent, and spending them on things like curb bump outs or raised crosswalks are likely not eligible uses of those dollars. So you'd need separate dollars identified. I think that making sure that budget is a major consideration in the policy recommendation is critical. But from there, I don't want to oversimplify it, but when we go through each of the projects, we do identify a scope that would say what else needs to be considered when this project is being implemented. And for example, last year when we went through all of the projects, staff had the transportation plan pulled up and open, and they were checking the I'm not going to use the right terminology because I've been out of the loop too long, but the priority areas, what are we calling them?
Tier 1 and tier 2, like safety priority areas. Yeah. That's
right. So staff were checking these maps. We're making notes as we went through each project, in a full plan year, we go through every single project and check the scope, make sure it's good, make modifications. And we were noting what needed to be implemented based on what the transportation plan called for. So I feel like it would become a bullet point or a couple of bullet points in the scope of these projects to say, evaluate for traffic calming improvements. And maybe staff would even be able to say, consider if there were specific treatments in mind for that area, then that maybe more direction be added. So I think procedurally, that's what it sounds to me like what would happen. It seems doable. It seems to me that funding would be the wild card there.
And I just may add one other quick distinction. Yeah. Sometimes we don't know exactly what the design feature will be, but we'll try to put like places. So like, for example, if it's an all ages and abilities bike network, or if it's a tier 1 safety corridor, we may say safety improvements to be determined through, it's not this verbose in the CIP, but we may say safety improvements or all ages and abilities bike facility without enumerating exactly what those are, because we won't know that until we get into the design. So it's meant to be a sort of like a reminder, a trigger for the project manager that when they do get the funding, when they consult the CIP, they see that that's included in the scope. And then they're supposed to consult back to the plan and make that part of the consideration as the design moves forward.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I guess just one other thing to add on is that the traffic calming program has in the past had a very robust public engagement process. And often there is public engagement with street resurfacing and with utility projects, but more often this is what you can expect. This is the noise, the dust, the whatever. It's technical decisions are being made by engineers about what size of water main needs to go in. You know, that's not a discussion point. So the engagement process looks very different for those projects. And I think just if it were going to evolve into to reflect the traffic calming level of public engagement, it may shift project timelines. It would certainly affect the amount of staff time that needs to be dedicated to each one of those projects. So I think those are some of the other like policy considerations I'd ask just that you think through how you advise public engagement be handled.
We've been thinking a lot.
Yes. Okay. Sure.
But no, that the process piece that answers my question. So thank you.
Okay.
Dharma?
Yeah, I'm a little bit, I am, and maybe this is getting too in the weeds, but I'm a little bit surprised to think about the fact that some of these funds that are used to reconstruct a road can potentially be used to change how that road is constructed. So I understand if you're adding on a bike path or adding on a sidewalk, that seems very separate. But if it's something like bump outs, I don't think that we're paying from some other fund for bump outs, or are we? Or, similarly, I would imagine with speed humps. So I guess I'm just kind of curious about the ability to use those same funds for things that just impact the design of the road, but I don't know. I don't know if my question makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think the question is wanting to know, like the funding sources that we use for things like resurfacing or reconstruction is pretty rare in the city of Ann Arbor. Resurfacing and capital preventative maintenance is more where we're focused now. But you're asking, could those funding sources also be used for traffic calming measures? And I think that's something we'd have to follow up and talk more with finance and talk. If Raymond has information, great. Otherwise, I would defer to following up with Nick Hutchinson. And we could look more into that. But I know there have been questions in the past about particularly things like speed humps were called into question of whether like our Act 51 dollars were eligible use.
Okay.
Because it's a different it's serving a different purpose than what those dollars are more clearly defined for. And we don't want to jeopardize our state funding for sure. So needing to get clarity around those it would definitely be a question for finance staff. And I think probably engineering and Nick Hutchinson, I think would be a good resource. So I could take that as a follow-up though.
Okay. I have a follow-up question that's like slightly divergent. I've looked at the dashboard a lot. It's super useful. So thank you, for everybody that put it together. I often look projects up because somebody will reach out to me and ask me about it, and I'll look and see, oh, it's slated for 2027. What does that actually mean? Does that mean that we're really planning to do it in 2027, or does that mean that it's so far out that really you can't really consider it part of the year until we engage in this like biannual planning process for the next 2 years?
Well, I think it's just making a note on the follow-up I'm going to do. Yes, I think that where the project is programmed in the CIP is our best guess at this point of where that project is going to happen. And I think you're right that, the nearer years, we have a better idea of. We know more realistically what other demands are going to be competing for those dollars and what projects are most likely to happen. So your closer years are a surer bet. And I think there tends to be more variability when you get to the outer, further away years. But I guess the best I can tell you is that is, with all of the information we have, it is truly our best guess of when we think that project is going to happen. We're not putting it there intending to move it, or, it's not like a placeholder. That really is when we think it would happen. I think one thing that I'll note about the CIP that's a change that I've been trying to work towards is there has historically been a habit of putting all of we identify all the project needs, we fill projects into whatever years they'll fit, and then whatever's left over that doesn't fit in those 6 years goes into the beyond category. And beyond sometimes has been misinterpreted, I think, to mean, if we made the plan for FY 24 through 29, everything that went in beyond sometimes gets interpreted as FY 30, and it's not. It could be FY 40 or 50. I mean, hopefully not, but projects are identified, and they're all these extra ones that we couldn't find money for in the first 6 years go into that. And some of them might be FY 30, but many of them won't be. So I think that one I would caution to be very careful if you see it that far out. It truly, we don't know at all when that project's going to happen.
Okay, so follow-up question just based on the question that Larry had at the beginning of our meeting is, I see the border to border trail Fuller to Maiden is listed on the CIP, and it's estimating 2029. Oh, and then it says beyond. So
yeah.
What is that? How is that
how to interpret that? Yeah. Given that the first year of funding, it is shown, I don't know, Raymond, if you recall this one specifically, looking strictly at like the way it's showing the dollars starting in FY 29, I would say that is our best guess. If we truly didn't know when or if that project were ever going to happen, I would have expected to see it all in beyond 29. But if it's showing some funding in 29 and some in beyond 29, I would expect that we do really think it could start in 29.
Okay, thank you.
On that one, there's this 400K shown for fiscal year 27, although it's not shown in the details when you click on the detailed link. But so it's like there's maybe a couple of projects. But yeah.
Which one is it, Brett, that you see that in 27?
This is the border to border trail.
Yeah, I see the border to border trail Fuller to Maiden Lane project. That's the one you're looking at?
No, it was interesting. Maybe it was like remnant of the previous thing I'd clicked on, but
it may not have refreshed. Maybe that could have been like an error with the
fiscal year 29 was correct at 1.2 million, but there was also a column for 27. All right, never mind.
Oh, okay.
All right. I had a question. I've always been a little confused on the interaction between the neighborhood street resurfacing program and the capital improvements plan. Like how does a street end up on the CIP versus waiting its turn in the neighborhood street resurfacing? How are those decisions made?
So in the CIP, there is, call it like a bucket project for local street resurfacing. So some hundreds of thousands of dollars maybe get allocated each year to do local street resurfacing projects. And then within that, we are also looking at all of the projects that are identified for street resurfacing. And if they have like a utility need, a lot of times that will get pulled out. So if we see that we're going to be resurfacing in an area, but we also know the water main needs to be repaired there, then some of those individual street names will get pulled out, even though they're local streets, they'll get pulled into their own individual project along with so that it can be coordinated with a utility project. And it doesn't necessarily get done with the batch of local street resurfacing work. So that's typically, like if a local street has been pulled out on its own, separate from the bulk program, then it's my understanding, the ones that are coming to mind for me are all the utility coordination projects. And then otherwise, projects that are on major streets are going to get identified individually by name, because that bucket of money that is for local streets has specifically for streets that are designated as a local street.
All right, thank you.
Makes sense.
Any other questions or comments? All right, as always, I encourage people to look at the dashboard, look through the documents. If you have comments or questions about specific projects, please pass them along to us or to Kayla. Look forward to next year, an even year. It's a lot more work for you and your team, but more opportunity for input then at that point.
Yeah, of course. Wonderful.
Right.
Thanks for having me. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for coming out. All right. Next up on the agenda is the crosswalk design guidelines. I asked Raymond to put in a short topic here so we can discuss what the preferred next steps are, if any, related to the city crosswalk design guidelines. If you recall, Steph gave a refresher on these guidelines as they exist back in March, and we talked about them a little bit since. There's been a couple of emails I think that have gone around. So while tonight's item is not listed as an action item, I'd like to have some conversation to help inform if we need to bring something back for formal action at a future meeting. If we need to draft a charter for something. So this is going to be kind of an open discussion. Like I said, Cynthia came in March, presented what the city does, showed us the matrix, the decision matrix or matrices for crosswalk treatments. There have been, like I said, a few questions raised. This topic isn't meant to go into those questions specifically, but is there anything, do people need any more satisfaction than, do we need to organize a response to Cynthia or organize some questions that we can send to Cynthia and the crosswalk team to get a more satisfying answer? If that's something that people are interested in, we should try to organize some questions or comments. Maybe consider bringing Cynthia back later in the year for an agenda topic. These kinds of things are on the table. So let's just open it up for discussion to see. I want to get people's thoughts out here during the meeting. I know there's been a few emails, but let's hear what people have to think. I have to say. Any raised hands? No. With that, I would say, I know people. Okay, Dharma, there you go.
I'm saving you. I think one thing that I would just like to see us do, if the city's not already doing it, is evaluating the effectiveness of our treatments. It seems like we've been adding a lot of new types of treatments around town, and I know that there are approaches to gathering data on, how often people are observing crosswalks. So I would really like to know the performance. I am curious about, I appreciated the FHA guidelines. I'd be curious how we can integrate. I don't think that this is part of our menu of options that we think of right now, but whether road configuration is ever an option. So lane reduction, for example, because that was in the FHA guidelines. And then last but not least, thinking about what other standards might be applicable, such as NACTO design standards, which seem to focus a lot on design. So those are just some thoughts that I have.
I know that the topic of lane reductions or road diets is something that's coming up in a future agenda in the near term. As far as what guidelines were used, what city staff used as inputs to their guidelines, maybe Raymond, you could shed some light. I don't recall from March. I know Cynthia talked about there were a few different inputs. Is there something we can answer quickly for Dharma about what went into that, or does you should send a question to Cynthia?
Yeah, well, I can kind of take a first stab at it. I think, first of all, we do reference multiple documents. The transportation plan, for one, talks about where new crosswalks can go, talks about, pedestrian enhancements and treatments and some quick build or permanent stuff. So that's probably resource 0 that we use. We regularly reference NACTO as well. NACTO is bookmarked on all of our computers. What's great about NACTO, if you're not familiar with it, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, all their resources are free. So you can go in and see like the urban bikeway design guideline and other things. And it's a really helpful tool. And then, we use other things like the manual and uniform traffic control devices, and all of those kind of help input into the crosswalk design guideline as well, which is kind of a process document, right? Kind of helps us tell us what kind of data to collect and leads us to a decision. And then we consult those other documents in terms of, how we place it, how we design it, how, and some of the finer tuning things. So yeah, that's a very good, a very high level overview. I'm sure Cynthia, Cyrus, or Luke could drill down several layers deeper, but that's my understanding now about how we advance those projects.
And it sounds like we might have a possible agenda topic on efficacy. If there is any data on how the treatments are working, like Dharma said in the past.
Data collection. Are we looking at how well they perform?
That's something we can
my anecdotal experience, for example, at the one on Ann Arbor Saline is that 9 times out of 10 someone blows through it even though they have plenty of time to stop. And I have to wait a bit. So things like that, like what is the efficacy of some of these beyond just crash data?
All right. Julie?
Yeah, just to follow up on Dharma's point about seeing whether or not our treatments work. I feel like when there are crosswalks, maybe like the one that Dharma mentioned near me, where it's clear that the treatment was the right treatment according to the book, all the things that you look up, but it doesn't actually cause cars to stop when there are people in the roadway and it's in the crosswalk. And it seems to me that the right step given that should be to put even stronger enforcements in there, because the ones that are supposed to work actually don't work. And so it's frustrating to me that there's just this, this book that we consult and we do what that says, even if it isn't adequate in the real world. So I don't know. I mean, I know that what I'm asking for is a lot more staff time, and it may not be practical, but that's what I would like to happen.
Is some data on, like we were talking about earlier, data on how well these things are working?
Yeah, and if they're not working, then kind of increase the level of for example, there's a crosswalks near me on Dexter that have signs and have lighting and have the crosswalk, the paint, but maybe they only have a sign on one side and not the other side. Well, maybe we could add a sign on both sides. Maybe we could put those things in the street that make people slow down. Why would, if it's not working, if 9 times out of 10, like Dharma says, people blow through without stopping, then shouldn't it be possible to increase the level of warning to drivers?
All right, so yeah, it sounds like maybe generally a stronger feedback loop using data collection and to inform city staff.
And just to make it possible to go beyond whatever the book says should work, if it's not actually working.
Peter. Oh, you're muted, Peter.
Thank you, Brett. So I'd like to touch on what both Julie and Dharma mentioned, and I think I also brought those up in my email, which I hope I sent out soon enough for people to have a chance to see. The first thing is that when we look at compliance rates, to me, that isn't strictly part of the conversation about crosswalk design guidelines. I think it's related, and it's definitely about crosswalks, but a strategy for boosting compliance could be like a totally separate, it's worth being considered as a totally separate topic. I mean, that is a good topic for us to be looking at, and looking at this, maybe some of the successes that we had in the later teen years where we were measuring compliance and even posting it and sharing it publicly. I don't know if everyone remembers those from, a few years ago. So yes, compliance is a good thing for us to be paying attention. The other thing I wanted to touch on was what Julie said, or what Julie brought up, and it's basically the idea that perhaps we just need to be doing more. And I put that in my email, that I'm ready to err on the side of having too many of these treatments rather than too few. And I feel like my community members around me agree that this is a place where we should be spending money. We are electing council representatives who are vocally pro-pedestrian and pro-bicycle and pro-non-motorized transportation. We are voting in favor of villages that are designating money for non-motorized transportation. Like, I think this is a place where we want to spend money, and we shouldn't be afraid to do it. Like I said, would rather err on the side of too much rather than too little when it comes to crosswalks and our guidelines for them.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments? So I'm thinking I might be hearing, or Dharma, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to point people to something, because sometimes our data reporting are kind of spread all over, and I forget where everything is too. But if you all recall, we were given a presentation about kind of speed management results, or what wasn't speed management, it was Vision Zero for the year. What was it, a dashboard snapshot? I can't remember. And I'm happy to share the link later. I don't have it right at my hands, but it has a map of all of the crosswalk treatments that were done in the last year. And unfortunately, it doesn't offer a count. It's just on a map visually, but it's quite a bit. And so it seems like we are stepping up a lot of resources to do this. I still don't know what the threshold is, but I just wanted to point people to that so that you could actually see what's been done over the last year, because I thought it was pretty impressive.
Thank you. So yeah, it sounds like maybe we'll have to think about this a little bit more. Maybe there's room for another agenda topic in the future. About, Cynthia had presented the guidelines as they are, but maybe we can talk a little bit more about implementation and selection of treatments from the guidelines if we need to. We'll talk about that offline maybe. All right, if there's no other comments, Raymond, is there anything else you wanted from this group on this topic?
No, I appreciate all the input.
Okay. All right, 8:59. Okay, moving on, staff report and updates. You received a staff report providing project updates with your agenda. It also includes the May crash report from the police department. So Raymond, if you wouldn't mind reviewing some of the highlights of these.
All right, there we go. Okay, I will quickly go through and highlight the changes from last month to this month. Resurfacing began this month, so it's expected to go through fall or possibly spill over into next year. Scioto Church is substantially complete and is open to traffic in all directions. Earhart is scheduled to start maybe as early as next week. It was awarded by City Council at the first meeting in July. South Main Street is open-ish for the moment, in large part to facilitate art fair, but the project is not yet done. There's still some work at the intersection of Main and Huron that will close part of that intersection once art fair wraps up. So still expect some disruptions on Main Street in the coming months. South Division Cycle Track was implemented. You may have even forgotten about this. This was a project that requested removal of parking for several blocks. This is between Packard and Hoover. And so it extends the cycle track that the DDA did, which got as far south as Packard, and extends it all the way to Hoover, and also implemented a new always stop sign at the intersection of Hoover and Division. So that project is now installed. 7th Street and Greenview, you just heard reports on that tonight, so I'll skip over those if that's okay with you. Downtown area circulation study, this was also approved by City Council at the first meeting in July. We just had a kickoff meeting this week or last week on it, and we are expected to give an update to the Transportation Commission at several points along the study timeline. The first of which is expected later this year, maybe November or December. We talked about that with the consulting team, so they do expect several touch points coming to the Transportation Commission. Under MDOT projects, there is a US 23 study going on right now. They had some open houses at the end of June, and I believe there's also still some materials online where you can still make comments. There's also a video that kind of describes the project. So if you're interested in improvements that MDOT has planned on M20 or on US 23 between M14 and I-94, I would encourage you to check out the website included in the packet. The Connected and Autonomous Vehicle Corridor, again, this is a state project in partnership with CABNU, which I believe is owned by Google. There was a local advisory committee meeting in June. And it looks like the first segment of the pilot is planned to be on I-94 between Rawsonville and Belleville. There's a project website that's included in the packet that you should be able to click on and find out more information. Traffic calming, the big one was Fulmer. You heard about that today. There maybe Baldwin will be ready to come back to you next month. Final polling is still open right now, so that closes at the end of this month. So if we have to see what the results are from that before we figure out next steps. But there is a chance that if it's approved by the neighborhood, that we might be able to bring that to you in August. Transportation implementation. We discussed at a previous meeting sunsetting the Vision Zero implementation subcommittee. So that happened at their meeting in June. And so we thank everybody who participated in that, especially, Julie and Brett from the Transportation Commission for their representation on that, as well as, the other members of the community that were involved. The speed management program, we're doing focus group interviews this week. So I'm starting to get some feedback in terms of what was heard. City staff are not part of that process. We're letting it be run completely by the consultants, so then that way there can be a candid conversation, and there's no, pride of authorship or ownership in that from, those who are attending, so that way they can speak frankly about what's working and what's not with the draft program as it stands now. Quick builds, you may have seen a lot of the pavement markings have been going in, a lot of the green pigment for bike lanes, some of the sort of grayish colored and hash out areas for the quick build bump outs that are going in. The vertical delineators, the plastic bollards are not yet in, but those are expected to go in shortly, maybe by August or so. So there's still more improvements to come. I know some people were a little dismayed that those didn't go in last year, but a lot of it was we were at the mercy of the pavement marking contractor. And there's only so many good days to do pavement markings, whether it be wet weather, cold weather, any number of things. So Bike corrals, the city is trying to pilot a sort of bike parking or bike corral request program outside of downtown. Right now, the DDA has, I think, well over 1,000 bike racks in the downtown area, and they've done a magnificent job kind of placing those both, in parking garages as well as, in sidewalks. And then they also deploy seasonal corrals, like the metal racks that you see in front of certain businesses. We're looking to kind of take that model and expand it out. It probably will be different types of materials used, but we're setting up a system where businesses and different places can request bike racks, and we're actually just put the purchase order request in for the first installment of a handful of racks that we can deploy, and then we'll test it, see how well it's working. So as soon as there's kind of, the online suggestion dashboard and all that thing ready to go, we'll be sure to share that information with you as well. We're currently working on that. Safe Streets and Roads grant, that was approved by City Council at the July 6th meeting as well. We're still waiting for FHWA to finalize that. So it's a bit of a slog, but we are starting to try to tee up some of the requests for proposals and solicitations so that as soon as that gets executed, we can hit the ground running and start getting the help that we need on board to move these, whether it's design consultants or whatever the case may be. Education and encouragement, the internal Lunch and Learn series is ongoing with Cynthia and Suzanne at the helm of that. And again, this is, as you've heard us say before, this is a way to sort of institutionalize the transportation plan across all city departments, and that's the intent here. So crashes, the May Police Department report for crashes is included in the packet, and I have that up. I can share that. But then the other thing that I did want to bring to your attention, and some of you, if not all of you, are probably aware, there was a crash at the intersection at Hill and Oakland on July 8th, very late in the evening at around 11:40 p.m., in which a user of a spin e-scooter was hit by a motorist and was killed. And so, when those sort of tragedies happen, we want you to be aware. And so that's why we're reporting on that. And then let me just close out with the ride, which I always feel awkward to report on since Ken is here, but the ride has completed safety and other updates to the Ypsi Transit Center in the lobby. And then they're setting that up for customer service specialists to be working there later this month or early next month, which is the first time that there's been actually, warm bodies in that location, which is an exciting development. And then, the ride continues to work towards expanding service, which was part of the millage that was passed in 2022. And you can find out more about that and look for opportunities for feedback in 2020 or in October later this year. And services are expected to begin in spring and summer. And then just while I have it, I should have probably shown it a second ago. This was the May report. There were 2 pedestrian crashes, B-level crashes. So, something to pay attention to. And then there was a cyclist crash as well, but it doesn't look like there was any injury to the cyclist. So that concludes my report, and I'm happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Sorry, Dharma.
Hoping that Lieutenant Sherba can shed some light on this. I had a back and forth with Lieutenant Forsberg. Sorry if I'm getting his title wrong. About that accident where it says NA. And the reason why I knew about that crash was because it's just down the street from me, and I saw it in the morning when I was walking the dog. That was where a school bus hit a person on a bicycle, and I believe they were injured, but it wasn't recorded at the time in the thing. And so basically I had a follow-up question about how are these things followed up so that, I think that we've been told several times that these data that we get in these monthly reports are preliminary. They're not the official signed off Michigan data, which takes some time to get. But I'm wondering how data get kind of officiated going forward, considering like this is not right. Like it's missing information. The NA, he confirmed, does not mean there was no injury. It means that the officer didn't record it. So could you shed light on that?
Yes, sometimes it's not necessarily that it's not yet recorded, it's that the investigation is not complete. So the preliminary report might be done, but the final investigation is not. And that can take, depending on the nature of the crash, it can take months.
Okay.
To come back with something like that. So the monthly data, and I think Pete brought this up at another time, is wanting to update like the previous month or months that when things change. We're kind of working on the process in order to do that. But in that case, I believe to answer your question, it says NA because it hasn't been determined yet.
Okay, got
what
it.
exactly happened.
But it would be if it would be determined by the time, and that's why there's this lag. By the time we get this date, the official data from the state of Michigan, then it would be finalized.
It should be.
Yeah. Okay.
In a perfect world, it would be updated with the correct injury and then sent to the state for that information. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Peter?
So the official data from 2022 has been released on Michigan Traffic Crash Facts.org, I think is the name of the web address. And that shows that there were 9 serious pedestrian crashes in 2022. I'm bringing that up because the June data for pedestrian or for traffic crashes, the June data has been shared in the city administrator's report. So we just saw the May report that Raymond shared, but the June data was published with the report that was in Monday's, attached to Monday's agenda. That included 1 serious bicycle crash, I think, but it also included 2 serious pedestrian crashes. So that takes the tally of serious pedestrian crashes so far this year up to 8. So we had 9 in all of 2022, and we had 7 in all of 2021. And here at the halfway point of 2023, we are at 8. I am really concerned about that. And I think everyone who's interested in this should be as well, that we appear to be out of control with the number of crashes that we've had. And I've brought this up after a very bad March, that we were on track for a bad year. We have already had more crashes, more serious pedestrian crashes this year, including 1 fatality, than we had in all of 2021. And I think that we need to be using that fact. We need to be using these crashes as a checkpoint for our plans for what we're doing to improve the infrastructure and to improve the transportation system. Are we working on projects that would have prevented these crashes if they had been implemented there? And if we are working on them, then it should be a call for us to accelerate our action on them. If the projects that we're working on are not, would not have prevented these crashes, then maybe we need to be thinking about whether they're the right projects to be working on. So that is my comment about crashes so far this year.
All right, thank you. Any other comments or questions on the staff reports or the May crash report? All right. Next, liaison reports. Any commissioners who serve as a liaison to another body or organization, if you would like to provide a brief report or update right now? Anybody? Right. Seeing none, any commission member communications? Any other reports or updates from anyone? All right. As always, agenda items, please feel free to email or mention now if you have any agenda topics that you'd like to be covered in the future. got some lists, some future ones. Raymond already mentioned the Baldwin traffic calming, possibly a crosswalk design guideline topic, curbside management study, pavement asset management plan. Peter, yes.
So Raymond, you touched on the speed, help me out, what's the name of it? Speed management or speed reduction?
You got a speed management program.
Is that something that we could have an expanded topic on, or introduction to?
Sure thing. Yeah. Happy to do that. I think what might make sense, if you'll indulge me, what we're trying to do is this round of stakeholder or focus groups, so that to see if there are changes. So maybe if we can kind of incorporate that feedback and report back on the changes, and then maybe give a overview of, or a refresher of what that was. I think it's probably been several months since we presented on that. I think it was part of the Vision Zero implementation strategy that we probably talked about, maybe close to a year ago or so. So I can appreciate the need to kind of talk about it again, especially because I think it will be a major initiative going forward. So yeah, it's a good suggestion.
All right, yeah, that and the revised neighborhood traffic calming program. I then expect we'll be seeing that sometime soon, hopefully. All right, next meeting will be held on Wednesday, August 16th at 7:00 p.m. It will also be a virtual meeting. If there are no objections, we'll adjourn our July 19th meeting. No objections. Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye.